The grand hall of the National Dialogue Forum buzzed with anticipation. Politicians, community leaders, and citizens from across the political spectrum had gathered for what was billed as a discussion on healing America's divisions. Few expected anything beyond the usual talking points and performative civility that characterized most such events. Representative Schiff, the veteran California congressman known for his measured demeanor and legal precision, sat attentively in the front row. After years of high-profile political battles, he had recently been speaking about the need for Americans to find common ground, despite deep differences. It was Representative Jasmine Crockett's turn at the podium. The rising congressional voice from Texas approached the microphone with a calm purpose that immediately commanded attention. Instead of beginning with policy positions or partisan framing, she started with something unexpected. A personal story about a community reconciliation project in her district that had brought together people from profoundly different backgrounds to address shared challenges. What happened next left the room in a reverent silence that would soon ripple across America. "Peace isn't the absence of disagreement," Crockett said, her voice clear and measured. "It's how we navigate those disagreements while recognizing each other's fundamental humanity. Our differences matter. They reflect genuine values and perspectives that deserve respect. But beneath those differences lies a shared stake in our communities and our country's future." As she continued, something remarkable happened. Schiff, known for his careful poker face in contentious hearings, set aside his notes. His expression transformed into one of genuine, deep listening. Not the performative attention politicians often display, but the authentic engagement of someone hearing something that resonated at a profound level. When Crockett concluded her opening thoughts, Schiff did something that surprised everyone in the room. Rather than immediately preparing his own remarks or checking his phone as many other leaders did, he remained focused on her words, nodding thoughtfully, visibly processing the perspective she had offered. This simple act of genuine listening between two public figures from different backgrounds would soon inspire a wave of hope across an America hungry for examples of respectful engagement across differences. Before we continue this remarkable story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that celebrates moments when our leaders demonstrate the respectful dialogue and genuine listening that democracy requires. To understand why this moment between Representatives Schiff and Crockett resonated so deeply with Americans, it's important to appreciate the unique journeys that brought these two public servants to that National Dialogue Forum. Schiff, 63, had built his congressional career on a foundation of legal expertise and measured approach to governance. Before politics, he had served as a federal prosecutor, an experience that shaped his methodical, evidence-based approach to public service. First elected to Congress in 2000, he had become known for his careful precision in high-stakes political moments. What many people didn't see behind Schiff's public persona was a thoughtful person who had been increasingly concerned about the deterioration of civic dialogue. In private conversations, he had expressed worry that Americans were losing the ability to disagree constructively while maintaining respect for democratic institutions and processes. A former staffer noted, "Behind the scenes, Congressman Schiff often spoke about how his children's generation would inherit the political climate we create now. He genuinely worries that the capacity for respectful disagreement is being lost in our political culture." In recent months, Schiff had begun speaking more publicly about the need for Americans to find ways to address deep differences without undermining democratic foundations. Though firmly committed to his policy positions, he had been calling for approaches that distinguish between strong disagreement and personal animosity. Jasmine Crockett brought a different perspective and background to the National Dialogue Forum. Before entering politics, she had worked extensively in community mediation and conflict resolution, helping diverse neighborhoods address tensions and find common ground on local challenges. This experience had given her practical insights into how people with profound differences could work together on shared concerns. Elected to Congress after a career focused on community advocacy, Crockett had quickly distinguished herself through her ability to articulate strong principles while maintaining open channels of communication with those who disagreed. Unlike many first-term representatives who adopted the confrontational style that often generates media attention, She had developed a reputation for direct but respectful engagement across differences. A colleague from her home state observed, "Representative Crockett doesn't confuse strong advocacy with personal attacks. She can disagree with you vigorously on policy while still acknowledging your concerns as legitimate. That's increasingly rare in today's political environment." In the months before the forum, Crockett had been working in her district on a remarkable community initiative called Common Ground. The project brought together residents from different backgrounds, political perspectives, and life experiences to address local challenges, from education to economic development to public safety. Rather than minimizing differences, the initiative created structured opportunities for residents to express their perspectives while working toward practical solutions to shared problems. The National Dialogue Forum that brought Schiff and Crockett together had been organized by a coalition of civic organizations concerned about increasing polarization in American society. Unlike many political events focused on particular policy goals, this gathering aimed to explore how Americans might engage across differences while maintaining democratic values and respect for diverse perspectives. We'd love to hear in the comments section if you've ever witnessed or experienced a moment where genuine listening across differences led to unexpected understanding or cooperation. These personal stories remind us that beneath our political divisions, we share a common humanity and stake in our shared future. The atmosphere before Crockett's address reflected the usual dynamics of such gatherings, polite but somewhat perfunctory attention, with many attendees more focused on networking and their own upcoming remarks than on genuine engagement with speakers. Few anticipated that this forum would produce a moment that would soon inspire Americans across the political spectrum. The National Dialogue Forum had begun with the familiar rhythm of such events: opening remarks emphasizing the importance of civil discourse, followed by speakers who largely reiterated known positions, with slightly gentler rhetoric than usual. Attendees listened with varying degrees of attention, many scrolling through phones between applause lines. When Representative Crockett took the podium, there was a subtle but noticeable shift in her approach that immediately distinguished her remarks from those that had preceded. Rather than beginning with abstract principles or political positioning, she started with a story that humanized the challenges of finding peace amid deep differences. "Last month in my district," she began, "I witnessed something remarkable. A neighborhood that had been deeply divided over a proposed development project, with genuine concerns on all sides about housing affordability, environmental impact, and economic opportunity. Engaged in a community dialogue process that transformed not just the project, but relationships within the community." She described how residents who had initially seen opponents as cartoon villains, greedy developers versus unreasonable NIMBYs, environmental extremists versus jobs-killing obstructionists, gradually began to recognize the legitimate concerns and values behind opposing positions. What made this process different wasn't that people abandoned their priorities or perspectives, Crockett explained. It was that they created space to understand the human experiences and genuine values behind positions different from their own. A grandmother concerned about being priced out of her longtime neighborhood. A young father worried about providing for his family without living opportunities. An environmental advocate carrying knowledge about lasting ecosystem impacts. As Crockett continued, she broadened the lens from this local example to the national landscape. "Peace isn't the absence of disagreement," she said, a line that would soon be quoted across media platforms. "It's how we navigate those disagreements while recognizing each other's fundamental humanity. Our differences matter. They reflect genuine values and perspectives that deserve respect. But beneath those differences lies a shared stake in our communities and our country's future." What distinguished Crockett's message from typical political rhetoric was its nuance and refusal to offer simplistic solutions. She didn't suggest that Americans could or should set aside deeply held convictions, nor did she imply that all perspectives were equally valid on every issue. Instead, she offered a framework for engagement that honored both conviction and connection. "Strong disagreement isn't the enemy of peace," she continued. "In fact, vigorous principled debate is essential in a healthy democracy. But when we lose sight of our shared humanity, when we begin to view those who disagree with us as enemies rather than fellow citizens with different perspectives, we undermine the foundations that make constructive disagreement possible. Throughout this portion of her address, Schiff's attention remained fully focused on Crockett's words. Unlike the perfunctory attention often displayed by politicians at such events, his engagement appeared genuinely thoughtful, the response of someone hearing ideas that connected with his own reflections and concerns. Crockett then offered practical insights from her Common Ground initiative, describing specific structures and approaches that had helped community members engage across differences. She emphasized the importance of creating spaces where people could express their full perspectives without immediate judgment or interruption. She described how focusing on shared goals, even when approaches differed dramatically, could create momentum for collaborative problem-solving. One principle that proved transformative, she noted, was distinguishing between acknowledging a concern and agreeing with a proposed solution. When people felt their legitimate concerns were genuinely heard, not dismissed or minimized, they became much more open to considering alternative approaches. As she spoke, Schiff's notepad remained untouched. Unlike many political figures constantly preparing their next response rather than truly listening, he appeared absorbed in her perspective, nodding at particular points that seemed to resonate with his own thinking. Crockett concluded the substantive portion of her address by connecting local community building with larger democratic resilience. The peace we need in America isn't a superficial politeness that avoids difficult conversations. It's a robust peace built on the capacity to engage our deepest differences with both conviction and respect. This isn't just about feeling better about our politics. It's about maintaining the democratic capacity to address the genuine challenges facing our communities and country. She then offered a personal reflection that further distinguished her remarks from typical political messaging. "I don't claim to always get this right," she acknowledged. "Like everyone, I sometimes fall short of these aspirations in moments of frustration or when core values seem threatened. But I've found that even when I fail, returning to these principles helps restore the possibility of constructive engagement." This acknowledgement of personal struggle and imperfection, rare in political discourse that typically prizes certainty and strength above vulnerability, created a moment of authentic connection with the audience. Several attendees who had been checked out earlier were now fully engaged, recognizing something beyond the usual political performance. As Crockett concluded her remarks, she offered a direct invitation to the gathered leaders and citizens. "I believe we can disagree better, not by setting aside our convictions or pretending differences don't matter, but by approaching those differences with the genuine curiosity and respect that democracy requires. Our communities and our country need this from all of us, regardless of political perspective or position." The applause that followed wasn't the automatic response common to such gatherings, but a thoughtful recognition that her message had touched something important. As Crockett returned to her seat, Schiff caught her eye and nodded with evident appreciation, a simple gesture of acknowledgement that would soon take on greater significance. The moderator, noticing this moment of connection, made an unplanned decision to invite Schiff to respond directly to Crockett's remarks before continuing with the planned program. "Representative Schiff, I noticed you seemed particularly engaged with Representative Crockett's perspective. Would you be willing to share your thoughts before we move to the next speaker?" This spontaneous invitation created an opportunity for dialogue that neither Schiff nor Crockett had anticipated, a genuine moment of engagement that would soon inspire Americans seeking evidence that respectful dialogue across differences was still possible in American political life. As Schiff approached the podium, attendees prepared for the typical political pivot, the acknowledgement of a colleague's remarks followed by a swift transition to one's own talking points. What happened instead surprised everyone in the room. "I'd like to thank Representative Crockett not just for her remarks, but for offering a perspective that has genuinely shifted my thinking," Schiff began. The admission of being influenced by another's viewpoint, rather than merely acknowledging it, was itself notable in current political discourse. He continued with unexpected candor. "Like many in this room, I came prepared with remarks about the importance of civil dialogue. But listening to Representative Crockett, I realized much of what I'd planned to say approached the subject from an incomplete perspective." Schiff set aside his prepared notes, a physical demonstration of his willingness to engage directly with the ideas Crockett had presented. What struck me most profoundly was her distinction between peace as the absence of disagreement and peace as how we navigate disagreement while recognizing each other's humanity. That framing clarified something I've been struggling to articulate in my own thinking about our current political climate. This public acknowledgement, a veteran congressman recognizing genuine insight from a newer colleague, modeled the very kind of listening across differences that Crockett had described. Rather than filtering her remarks through partisan lens or looking for points to contest, Schiff engaged with the substance of her perspective. The community dialogue example Representative Crockett described resonates with experiences I've had in my own district, Schiff continued. When we create space for people to express their genuine concerns without immediate judgment, something changes in the dynamic. Not necessarily agreement, but a kind of recognition that makes constructive engagement possible. He shared a brief story from his own experience, describing a community forum on a contentious local issue where initial hostility transformed into productive problem-solving when participants began to recognize the legitimate concerns behind opposing positions. What made the difference wasn't finding some middle ground that satisfied nobody. It was creating space for people to feel genuinely heard before moving to solutions. Schiff then reflected on how these local experiences might inform national political discourse. In Congress, we often focus on the substance of our disagreements, which matter tremendously, while paying less attention to the process of how we engage those disagreements. Representative Crockett's remarks remind me that both substance and process are essential to a functioning democracy. The authenticity in Schiff's response was evident in his willingness to move beyond scripted remarks to engage in genuine reflection. This wasn't the calculated performance of a politician, i.e. seeking advantage, but the thoughtful response of a public servant genuinely considering how to strengthen democratic engagement. Schiff acknowledged the challenges of translating community-level dialogue to national political discourse. The scale and intensity of our national divisions present real obstacles to the kind of engagement Representative Crockett described. Media incentives, political fundraising, and partisan structures all push against this approach. But rather than using these challenges as excuses, he suggested they made intentional efforts toward respectful engagement even more essential. Precisely because our systems often reward division over connection, those of us in public service have a special responsibility to model engagement that acknowledges both deep differences and shared democratic values. As Schiff continued his impromptu response, the atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. Attendees who had been prepared for the usual political theater were witnessing something different. Two public figures from different backgrounds engaging in genuine dialogue about how Americans might address deep differences while maintaining democratic cohesion. Schiff then directly addressed Crockett, turning toward where she sat. I want to ask you, Representative Crockett, about something specific from your remarks. You mentioned distinguishing between acknowledging concerns and agreeing with proposed solutions. Could you say more about how that principle has worked in practice in your community initiatives? This direct invitation to dialogue, not as a political performance, but as genuine engagement with a colleague's experience and insight, created a moment of authentic connection that caught the attention of everyone in the room. Crockett nodded and stood, the moderator quickly bringing her a microphone. "Thank you for that thoughtful question," she responded. "What we've found in practice is that many conflicts escalate because people don't feel their concerns are even recognized as legitimate. When someone believes their perspective is dismissed rather than understood, they're much less likely to consider alternative approaches." She offered a concrete example from her community initiative. In one neighborhood dialogue about public safety, residents had dramatically different perspectives on police presence, some wanting more visible patrols, others concerned about over-policing and harassment. The breakthrough came when each group acknowledged the legitimate concerns of the other, safety and security on one hand, dignity and equal treatment on the other. This acknowledgement didn't create immediate agreement on solutions, but it created space for collaborative problem-solving that eventually led to community-based approaches addressing both sets of concerns. Schiff nodded with evident interest. That makes tremendous sense. I've noticed in my own experience that when people feel their core concerns are dismissed rather than understood, the conversation often shifts from substance to identity, from my idea to my group, making constructive engagement much more difficult. This exchange, two representatives genuinely building on each other's insights rather than positioning for advantage, modeled exactly the kind of respectful dialogue they were discussing. Attendees watched with growing interest, many putting away phones to focus on this unexpected moment of authentic engagement. Schiff offered a final reflection before returning to his seat. What gives me hope from our exchange today is the reminder that, while our national challenges are significant, the capacity for respectful engagement across differences is not lost. It's present in communities across America, as Representative Crockett's examples demonstrate. Perhaps our role as leaders isn't to create this capacity from nothing, but to amplify and support what already exists in the communities we serve. As he concluded, the applause wasn't the perfunctory response typical of such gatherings, but a genuine recognition that something meaningful had transpired, not a performance of civility, but an authentic demonstration of the kind of respectful engagement that democracy requires. What neither Schiff nor Crockett could have anticipated was how quickly video clips of their exchange would spread across social media platforms and news outlets, resonating with Americans hungry for evidence that genuine dialogue across differences was still possible in American political life. In the days following the National Dialogue Forum, something remarkable began happening across America. What might have been just another political event was transformed by Crockett's message on peace and Schiff's genuine listening into something that resonated far beyond typical political audiences. Video clips of their exchange began circulating across social media platforms, not primarily in partisan echo chambers, but across diverse communities and viewpoints. Comments revealed how deeply their interaction had resonated. This is what leadership should look like. First time I've seen politicians actually listen to each other in years. Different perspectives, but shared respect. We need more of this. What made the exchange so compelling wasn't the erasure of differences between Schiff and Crockett. Their political perspectives and priorities remained distinct. Rather, it was their demonstration that strong convictions could coexist with genuine listening and respect, that democratic engagement didn't require either abandoning principles or treating those with different views as enemies. News programs that typically focused on political conflict found themselves analyzing what had made this exchange so different. One commentator observed, "In a political environment that rewards performative outrage, Crockett and Schiff chose a different path, genuine engagement across differences, and the public response suggests Americans are hungry for more of this approach." The timing proved especially meaningful, coming during a period of intense national division, when many Americans worried about the fragility of democratic institutions. The Schiff-Crockett exchange offered a tangible reminder that a different kind of political engagement was possible. A poll conducted the following week found that 84% of Americans across party lines viewed the exchange positively. More significantly, 71% said it made them more hopeful about the possibility of addressing national challenges despite deep political differences. For Schiff and Crockett themselves, the public response was both surprising and affirming. Schiff, in an interview days later, reflected, "What happened at that forum wasn't planned or scripted. It was simply two people engaged in genuine dialogue about how we might better navigate our differences while maintaining our shared democratic values." The response suggests this approach resonates much more deeply with Americans than the conflict-driven model that dominates so much of our political coverage. Crockett, speaking to her constituents at a town hall, similarly noted the unexpected impact. "The response to that exchange has been overwhelming, and it tells me something important. Americans are tired of performative conflict that generates heat without light. They're hungry for engagement that acknowledges both our real differences and our shared stake in this democracy." The most immediate impact came in how ordinary citizens began approaching political differences in their own communities. A network of community mediators reported unprecedented interest in dialogue facilitation training. A civic organization that had been struggling to attract participants to community forums suddenly found their events oversubscribed, with attendees explicitly citing the Schiff-Crockett exchange as their inspiration for getting involved. Local officials across the country began implementing elements from Crockett's common ground approach. In a small town in Michigan, the mayor established a community dialogue series using the principles Crockett had outlined, bringing together residents with different perspectives on controversial local development projects. In a diverse neighborhood in Atlanta, community leaders adapted the framework to address tensions around gentrification and housing affordability. Educational institutions took note as well. Several universities incorporated the exchange into courses on democratic deliberation and civic engagement. A curriculum developer created materials for high schools based on the principles Crockett had outlined, helping students develop skills for respectful engagement across differences. The program, initially piloted in schools across Texas and California, Crockett's and Schiff's home states, soon expanded nationwide due to high demand from educators. Neither Schiff nor Crockett changed their core political positions in the aftermath of their exchange. Schiff continued advocating for his policy priorities, and Crockett remained committed to her legislative agenda. What changed was how they engaged across those differences, both becoming more intentional about creating space for dialogue, even while maintaining clear positions. 6 months after the forum, Schiff and Crockett were invited to co-host a series of community dialogues across the country. Despite their different political perspectives, they shared stages in diverse communities to discuss how Americans might rebuild democratic culture based on both strong convictions and genuine respect. What Representative Crockett and I demonstrated wasn't revolutionary, Schiff told one audience in Ohio. It was simply a return to fundamental democratic values that have always made American self-government possible. The understanding that we can be adversaries on policy without being enemies as citizens, that disagreement isn't the same as disrespect. Crockett nodded in agreement. Throughout American history, our greatest challenges have been addressed not when one side completely defeated the other, but when citizens with different perspectives found ways to engage constructively despite real differences. That's the tradition we're trying to honor. The dialogue series concluded with both representatives announcing the creation of the American Common Ground Initiative, designed to support community-based dialogue efforts across the country. With funding from civic organizations across the political spectrum, the initiative provided training, resources, and structural support for communities seeking to address local challenges through constructive engagement across differences. In one small town in Pennsylvania, the local chapter brought together residents with dramatically different views on environmental regulation and economic development, issues that had divided the community for decades. As one participant observed, we're not suddenly agreeing on everything, but we're finding areas where we can work together while still being true to our different perspectives. Most importantly, we're seeing each other as neighbors again, not just opposing political categories. A year after their initial exchange, both Schiff and Crockett were featured in a documentary examining how their approach to political dialogue had inspired community initiatives across the country. Schiff reflected, "What still moves me is how that unplanned moment resonated with regular Americans, not Washington insiders, but everyday citizens who are tired of the constant combat and hungry for leadership that respects both strong convictions and the need for constructive engagement." Crockett agreed. "The response showed me something powerful, that beneath all our political noise, there's a deeper American tradition of engagement across differences that people are eager to reclaim. Our divisions are real and significant, but how we navigate them matters tremendously for the health of our democracy." Perhaps the most telling indicator of impact came from an unexpected source. A national civics education organization created an award named for both Schiff and Crockett, given not to those who won the most political battles, but to those who demonstrated exceptional capacity for respectful engagement across differences while maintaining clear principles. When informed of the award, both expressed being deeply moved. "That might be the greatest honor of my career," Schiff remarked, "because it recognizes what democracy actually requires, the ability to engage differences vigorously while maintaining respect for the democratic process and for fellow citizens with different views." Crockett concurred, "I can't think of a better legacy than inspiring citizens to become both strong advocates for their convictions and respectful participants in our shared democratic life. That's how we'll build the peace our communities and country need, not by minimizing differences, but by engaging them with both conviction and respect." everyday citizens continued finding meaning in their exchange. A retired teacher in Arizona described showing the video to her civic education students. "I wanted them to see that strength doesn't mean disrespect, that standing firm in your beliefs doesn't require dismissing others. That's the democratic tradition I grew up with, and the one I want them to carry forward." Community organizers in diverse settings reported how the principles Crockett had outlined and Schiff had affirmed were transforming local engagement. A coalition working on affordable housing in Oregon described how distinguishing between acknowledging concerns and agreeing with solutions had created breakthrough moments in previously deadlocked community discussions. A neighborhood association in Florida reported how focusing on shared goals, despite different approaches, had helped bridge racial and socioeconomic divisions in addressing local environmental challenges. The story of Crockett's message on peace and Schiff's attentive listening serves as a powerful reminder that even in divided times, the capacity for respectful engagement across differences remains a vital American tradition. Their exchange demonstrated that peace in a diverse democracy doesn't require abandoning strong convictions or pretending differences don't matter, but rather engaging those differences with the respect and goodwill that democratic citizenship demands. As we conclude this remarkable story, we invite you to like and subscribe for more content that celebrates moments of wisdom and respect in American public life. In a media landscape that often amplifies division, we're committed to highlighting examples of what's still possible when leaders choose a different path. America's challenges remain significant, and the differences in how we understand and address those challenges are real. But the wave of hope sparked by Crockett's message and Schiff's response reminds us that addressing these challenges doesn't require abandoning our principles. It requires engaging our differences with both conviction and respect. In your own life and community, consider how you might apply the lessons from this powerful moment. How might you create space for genuine listening across differences while maintaining your own values and convictions? The future of our democracy may well depend on citizens willing to follow the example these leaders set, standing firmly in their principles while extending genuine respect across our deepest differences.